Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I begin in the name of God, the most merciful, the most kind. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. All praise is due to Allah, the Lord of all the worlds. And I greet you with a greeting of peace and mercy. Assalamu alaikum. So, thank you. My topic, being a Muslim in Britain. Being a Muslim in Britain. Well, I've been a Muslim, inshallah, this March for 25 years in Britain. So I've probably been a Muslim longer than most of you have been alive. And yet, the story, the narrative of why did you become a Muslim still intrigues, still confuses. So I suppose I would throw the question back to many of my young Muslim brothers and sisters. Why are you a Muslim? Why do you take that deen of Islam? Why do you hang out at the ISOC? Why do you still say, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah? There is nothing worthy of worship except the one God. And Muhammad is the messenger, a prophet of God, the last of all of the prophets, the seal of the prophet, the seal of the lineage of prophets, from Adam right the way through to Moses, Noah, David, Solomon, Jesus. Why are you a Muslim in Britain? And what does it mean for you to be a Muslim in Britain? And I'm just going to take, you see, I'm an editor, so I pick at words. I'm just going to take exception with the in Britain, because that was my topic. Being a Muslim in Britain. And I'm going to say that we're not Muslims in Britain, we're Muslims of Britain. Turn that IN to an OF, of Britain, except for the foreign students, of course. But you wouldn't say the Muslims being a Muslim in Egypt or being a Muslim in Malaysia or being a Muslim in Indonesia. You talk about the Muslims of Egypt, the Muslims of Bangladesh, the Muslims of Pakistan, the Muslims of Malaysia. And we need to think of ourselves that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God the most merciful, has placed us in Britain for a reason. That we're Muslims of Britain for a reason. Now, as I say, I run a magazine, so not only am I interested in grammar, but I'm also interested in stories. And to describe, or when we think about being Muslims in Britain, or Muslims of Britain, it's about stories, and different people have got different stories. You've all got stories. I've got stories. What's my story will be very different to your story. But yet we're both Muslims of Britain. We're all Muslims of Britain, but yet our narratives are different. And so I'm going to spend this evening, my 20 minutes, talking about narratives. Because I believe that the Quranic paradigm and how it teaches through stories, actually. It's not unusual. It teaches through the story of Joseph, peace be upon him. It teaches through the story of Abraham. It teaches through the story of Noah. It teaches through the story of Moses. It teaches through the story of Mary, of Jesus, and the stories of the companions and the stories that existed. It teaches and tells us through archetypal stories, essential truths about ourselves, about what we are, about what we should be, about what we should strive for. And it tells us stories not because the Most High, the One, the Merciful, the Beautiful, had nothing better to do than dish out a few stories in a limited amount, but in order that we should know, that we should think, because the Quran is dedicated to people who think. So the Muslims of Britain should be people who think, foremost amongst people who think. So you're here, perhaps you're studying mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, medicine, and also other forms of science that I probably couldn't tell you and help you with. I can't even help my 11-year-old daughter with her physics homework. So, you're all studying these things. You're people who think, thinking about science and numbers and structures and forms. But are you people who think about how that all comes together in the cosmos? Are you thinking about the before? Are you thinking about what it means and the implications of being human? Not being a Muslim of Britain, but being a human. And what that means to engage as a human being with other human beings. And the implications of our impact on the world. So the first thing I'm going to say about these narratives of Muslims in Britain is it's not one thing. There are so many stories out there. There's 100 people in this room. There's 100 different stories. There's 2.7 million Muslims in this country, according to the latest census. That's 2.7 million stories. The myth that there is a single Muslim identity is a myth that is put forward by the likes of the EDL or the Daily Mail. We need to crack that. We need to break that notion of the monolithic Muslim bloc, because it's very different. But let's give the potential for different narratives. I can give you the narrative of victimhood. I can give you that one very easily. We're quite good at it, actually. I can give you the narrative that says 30% of Muslims are under the age of 16. I can give you the statistical narrative, actually. 30% of Muslims are under the age of 16, 50% are under the age of 25. 30% of Muslims will leave school with no qualifications whatsoever. Only 50% of Muslims or people of Pakistani and Bangladeshi heritage will leave school with the government-recommended 5 GCSEs, A to C. Obviously, you're not amongst that group because you managed to get into Imperial. So therefore, I'm presuming, as a Russell Group university, you must have at least 8 A's in GCSE or A stars, because that's what you're supposed to need. 90% of Pakistani and Bangladeshi children will start school unable to speak English, or not at least have English as their mother tongue. 69% of Muslim women are not part of the labour force. The health of the Muslim community is some of the worst in the entire country. Disproportionately affected by diseases such as coronary heart disease, stroke, diabetes. Muslims live in overcrowded accommodation. I can give you that narrative. It's the Muslims of Britain, if you want that narrative. It exists. Go out there. Statistically, it exists. But aren't we more than a statistic? Aren't we more than just a number, n equals, in some master's thesis or policy report? We're surely more than just a number. So perhaps another narrative. Perhaps a narrative that might be presented from the EDL or the Mail on Sunday. The Muslim plot to bomb the Pope. The Muslim in pool cover-up. The Muslim thug that beat up 12-year-old British schoolboy, as if the Muslim thug isn't a 12-year-old British schoolboy. These very strange narratives that will be the immigrant terrorist asylum seeker, the extremist, the potential, the preventing violent extremism programme that presumes violent extremists everywhere they go. From the City of London prayer room, potentially this campus, potentially wherever we go, on the tube. The homegrown bomber. What turns homegrown Muslims into bombers? The extremist, the potential extremist, the one that doesn't really belong, the one who's always on the verge, the fifth columnist. That's another narrative. It's a narrative that's put forward. It's a narrative that sometimes we accept. It's a narrative that we play with, that we defend. Or we can have another narrative, the narrative of, the oppressor of women, the narrative of the one who believes in violence. Again, we can play defensive football all night with that kind of, but I'm anti-violence, I'm anti-extremism, I'm anti-terrorism, honest type narrative. The Muslims of Britain, are you British first or are you Muslim first? Is there something that I have to put my loyalties in order of belonging, in order of priority? Just the question presumes. And then, do I really belong? Well, I don't believe in the foreign policy of here or the foreign policy in Iraq or Afghanistan or Palestine. So therefore, if I question my government, maybe I don't belong. So there's the questions of belonging, questions that we internalise and externalise and people impose upon us. Another whole set of complex narrative. But there's also another narrative. It's the narrative I believe that we should be propounding. It's the narrative I believe which is closer to the reality. It's not a statistical narrative. It's not a narrative of the headlines. It's a narrative of history and it's a narrative of future. It's a narrative which says that Muslims have been engaged with Britain for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's a narrative that says we've been trading because there's a coin of Offer X Offa reigns on one side, and you can go to the British Museum to see it. On one side, Offa rex, on the other side, La ilaha illallah. It's a coin to show that Offa rex, king of Mercia around 800, wanted to trade in a silver coin with the Muslims. That's one narrative. There's a narrative you could be looking at in terms of, you study Newtonian physics, go into Cambridge, look at his archives, look at the fact that he spoke Arabic. Look at the fact that Wren, Sir Christopher Wren, architect of the great St. Paul's Cathedral, spoke Arabic. Look at the narrative that said in Busby, the headmaster of Westminster School, who had within his mantra, the slogan of Westminster, give us an English boy, we'll return you an Arab. Because Arabic was the language of science. If you were in Imperial College or some such scientific institution in the Dark Ages, you would have had to have spoken Arabic in order to have understood any form of scientific discovery, just like we have to speak English today. You would have had to have spoken Arabic to understand Avicenna's Canon, which was the medical textbook in Cambridge up until the 17th century. You would have had to have spoken Arabic to understand maths. You would have had to have spoken Arabic to understand any form of our discoveries of technology, of modernity, when that was modern. And we've played into Europe. We weren't just the refrigerator for Hellenic thought. Rather, we took Platonian and Aristotelian theologies and thinking, and we added to it, we took away from it, we constructed it, we deconstructed it, we put it forward, we proposed new thinkings. We weren't just a motorway for Indian mathematics. We manipulated, we changed. We've got scientific discoveries that are used to this day. But let's not bang on about our past, because it really does us very little credit. But let's understand that we were stakeholders in Britain and European history, that Islamic civilization, the civilization that we hold to, our history, our past, our inheritance as Muslims of Britain, that we have this inheritance, that we are part and parcel of Europe. We have given Europe much. We have given Britain much. And we must continue to do so. Because this is the other narrative. We're stakeholders in Britain's past. We must be stakeholders in Britain's future. We must be recognition that wherever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed us, wherever God the merciful, the kind, places us, He's done so for a reason. And He has appointed every human being as a khilafah of the earth, as a steward of the earth. So where has He appointed you, and you, and you, and you, and you? Where are you a steward of? You're here today in Britain. There's a role for you in Britain. And that's the narrative that we need to put forward, to say to ourselves, well, I'm a doctor, I'm a mechanical engineer, I'm an environmental studies student, I'm a chemical engineer, and all of the many things, I'm a mathematician, all the many things that you may be in this room. And I will give, because the purpose of life is indeed to worship God, but there is nothing worse than a life wasted. For the purpose of life has to be to live a life of purpose, to be purposeful, to engage, to recognize that we have responsibilities. And so we can take from our Quranic narratives in many different ways. But one of them, which I feel is so appropriate for being Muslims of Britain, is the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, who came as a refugee, who was thrown into prison, who was treated so badly, but who saved Egypt by caring, by recognizing the stewardship, the trust, the amana that was placed upon him, by his role, his position. He had talent, he had skills, and he gave. He didn't turn around and say, well, look, you chucked me in prison. Why should I help you? You treated me badly. I mean, if anyone had a right to victimhood, right, Yusuf alayhi salam, Joseph, peace be upon him, had a right to victimhood. He could have played that narrative well on time. My brother sold me into slavery. I came and I tried to help you. Your wife, she lied upon me. She treated me badly. I was treated appallingly by your criminal justice system. I spent 10 years rotting in prison. God, right to victimhood narrative. But yet he came out and he saved Egypt by helping them store their food, by showing them through his knowledge, through his learning, through his capacity to think as the Quran directs. And he showed them a way. And through doing that, he saved his family. He saved his family. So what do we want Muslims of Britain to be? Because it's in our hands. Steve Jobs says, if you want to predict the future, create it. You know, it's a wonderful, wonderful idea, and it doesn't just apply to technology. If you want to have a sense of what the future looks like for Muslims of Britain, then be that today, what you want for tomorrow. And so engage. So you're fantastic. You're in the ISOC, but also be with the Friends of the Earth Society, the Help the Ages Society. Work on an interfaith program with the JSOC and the Christian SOC in order to work out some program for the homeless. Engage as stewards. Study and study hard and be the very best. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes excellence. So be excellent. And then give of yourself again and again for no reward. Don't take the job with the best pay. Don't convert your engineering into just banking. Right? So many of you do. I mean, and if you're going to be a banker, then be trustworthy and amazing and show that we can create an economic system that doesn't, be based on a corrupt LIBOR rate. Don't just tweak the system. Be impassioned enough. Care enough, be inspired enough to be better. And be better because you're a Muslim, because you are Mu Islam, the one who does Islam, the one who self-surrenders himself or herself onto the Lord of the world, the merciful, the kind, the beautiful, the beneficent, the just. Think of all of the names, the names, the beautiful names of the creator of the universe. And think, how can I get those names? How can I bring those names and bring them manifest into this world? For surely that is what a Muslim does. He brings the beautiful names and tries to make them manifest. So Allah is the just. Where is our justice? When he says in the Quran, the closest thing to awareness of me is justice. The closest thing to taqwa, to God consciousness, is justice. How are we being just? Just to ourselves, just to the world, just to our families, just to our neighbors. Justice. He is beautiful. He is kind. How are we kind? Think about it just today. How was I kind? What random act of kindness have I put forward today? What seat did I give up on the tube? What buggy did I carry? Whose shopping did I lift? Who did I smile at? Who did I help? What word was there that I gave to another person? And then we think we've got to be the big things. But the small things matter. These are the Muslims of Britain. The Muslims of Britain that love Britain. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed us here. We can have a narrative of hate. We can have a narrative of victimhood. Or we can have a narrative of collaboration and of contribution. The clash of civilizations is a paradigm that's being imposed upon us by others. And we can accept that paradigm. Or we can turn around and say, you know what? The clash of civilizations is something I reject. It's not my narrative. I have a narrative of hope. I have a narrative of a future. I have a narrative of building. And I want the collaboration of civilizations because Islam was and is a great civilization. A civilization worthy to be discussed and argued with sometimes. But it's a civilization nonetheless, a civilization that brought us to where we are, a civilization that gave us so much. And we will collaborate in Britain, in America, in France, in Germany, in Australia, anywhere in the world, because we are stewards of the earth. And that is our responsibility. Jazakallah khair. Anything I've said of any good is from Allah, the mistakes there are mine. Assalamu alaikum.